Most Christians read Malachi 3 as though God were standing over his people asking for money. But that is not the secret of the passage. Heaven is not revealing a financial demand first. Heaven is revealing a covenant order. It is not merely a money passage, it is an order passage. It is a protection passage. It is God showing his people that when honor is restored, when lordship is recognized, when trust comes back into its rightful place, something changes in the unseen realm. The secret of Malachi 3 is not that God wants something from you. It is that God wants covenant order around you. Satan desperately hopes you never see this. He wants you to keep the conversation trapped at the level of dollars, percentages, bills, budgets, and religious obligation. He wants you arguing about the amount while he keeps feeding on the disorder. Because the enemy is not merely after your income, he is after your order. He is after your peace. He is after the quiet leakage that drains strength from your house. He is after confusion in your decisions, fear in your giving, anxiety in your planning, and self-reliance in your heart. The devourer does not have to destroy everything in one dramatic attack. Sometimes he simply consumes slowly. A little peace here, a little clarity there, a little harvest before it ripens, a little joy before it matures. A little provision through waste, pressure, delay, and disorder. And many believers keep praying for increase while ignoring the places where covenant recognition has been neglected. Malachi is not first about God trying to take, it is about God trying to cover. When God says, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse," he is not inviting his people into a transaction. He is calling them back into recognition. He is saying, return the order, restore the honor, put first things first again. Let me be God in the place where fear has been ruling. Let me be owner where anxiety has been pretending to be wisdom. Let me be source where self-dependence has exhausted your soul. The tithe is not buying protection. You cannot purchase the rebuke of God against the devourer. You cannot hire heaven to defend you. That is not covenant. That is commerce. The tithe is not a religious payment that bribes God into blessing. It is a covenant confession that brings the life back under the government of God. It says, "You are the source, not me. You are the owner, not me. You are the provider, not me. You are the protector, not me." And that confession has power because order has authority. The devourer does not fear religious talk. He does not tremble because a man knows verses while his life remains governed by fear. He does not back away from songs, phrases, and declarations when the heart still lives outside the order of trust. But he fears a life brought under lordship. He fears a home where God is honored first. He fears a believer who has settled the issue of ownership. He fears covenant order because covenant order gives heaven legal ground to defend what belongs to God. That is why the promise is so strong. I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes. God does not say, you will rebuke him. He does not say, try harder against him. He does not say, manage the devourer with your own strength. He says, I will rebuke. Heaven steps into the place where order has been restored. This is the reframe that breaks fear. Tithing is not God reducing you. It is God reordering you. It is not heaven taking from your house. It is heaven placing your house under a higher jurisdiction. It is not loss. It is lordship. It is not pressure. It is protection. The devourer thrives where recognition is absent, where God is verbally honored but practically displaced, where fear makes the first decision and God receives what is left. But when the believer returns to covenant order, peace begins to govern again. The heart comes out of panic. The mind comes out of fog. The hand opens without terror, because the soul remembers, I am not my own source. I am not alone in this field. I am not uncovered in this economy. I belong to the Lord. And what belongs to the Lord comes under the care of the Lord. That is why Malachi must be read in its proper atmosphere. We cannot walk into Malachi 3 as though we are walking into a fundraising appeal. We are walking into a covenant courtroom. God is not standing before his people as a needy collector. He is standing as Lord, as Father, as covenant God, addressing a people whose worship has lost its weight, whose honor has become thin, whose trust has fallen out of alignment. The whole book is filled with the language of disorder. The priests have despised his name. The altar has been treated casually. The people have questioned his love. Their relationships have been fractured. Their words have become hard against God. And then, when the issue of the tithe appears, it does not appear by itself. It appears as part of a larger breach. It is not isolated from worship. It is not separated from honor. It is not disconnected from trust. The tithe becomes the visible evidence of an invisible disorder. This is why the Lord says, "Return unto me, and I will return unto you." That is the atmosphere of Malachi 3. Return. Not merely give. Return. Not merely contribute. Return. The issue is relational before it is financial. The issue is covenant before it is currency. God is not saying, "Raise my income." He is saying, "Restore my place." He is saying, "Let the order of my lordship be seen again in the order of your life." Then he says, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house." Notice the sequence. The command comes before the promise. The return comes before the release. The order comes before the opening. The tithe is brought into the storehouse before the windows of heaven are opened, and before the devourer is rebuked. Heaven does not begin the passage with increase. Heaven begins with restored recognition. This is where many have missed the mind of God. They have taken the promise and separated it from the order. They want open windows without restored honor. They want rebuked devourers without surrendered ownership. They want harvest preserved while lordship remains theoretical. But the Word does not arrange it that way. Malachi gives us a divine sequence. Order is restored. Heaven opens. The devourer is rebuked, and fruit is preserved. Order first. Opening second. Rebuke third. Preservation fourth. That sequence matters because God is not merely promising to give more. He is promising to protect what is connected to his purpose. He says, "I will open you the windows of heaven." Then he says, "I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes." Then he says, "The devourer shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field." This is not just abundance language. This is protection language. This is preservation language. This is heaven saying, "What is under my order comes under my defense." I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes. That is the central legal declaration. God does not say, "I will advise you about the devourer." He does not say, "I will give you a theory about the devourer." He does not say, "I will encourage you while the devourer continues unchecked." He says, "I will rebuke." That word carries authority. It carries government. It carries judgment. It is the voice of the Lord standing between His covenant people and the force that has been eating what should have matured. And He says, "For your sakes." That means the rebuke is not because the people are powerful in themselves. It is not because they finally became strong enough to outfight what had been consuming them. It is because they have returned to order. It is because what they are, what they have, and what they are cultivating has been brought back under covenant recognition. Heaven now has legal ground to speak. The devourer is not impressed by scattered religious emotion, but he must answer to covenant authority. He may ignore panic. He may exploit confusion. He may feed on divided trust. But when God rises and says, "This house is under my government, this field is under my care, this fruit is connected to my purpose," the devourer faces a voice higher than the weakness of man. That is the relief of Malachi 3. God is not merely saying, "Give me something and I will give you something back." He is saying, "Return the order and I will defend the field." He is saying, "Restore recognition and I will confront the erosion." He is saying, "Bring what belongs to me into its rightful place, and I will stand over what remains, what grows, what ripens, and what must not be prematurely destroyed." So the promise is larger than increase. Increase without protection can still be devoured. Harvest without preservation can still be lost. Opportunity without order can become pressure. Provision without lordship can become anxiety. But when covenant order is restored, heaven does not only release, heaven guards, heaven governs, heaven watches over the field. This is why the tithe cannot be reduced to a bill paid to heaven. It is the act that testifies, God has first place here. It is the witness that says, this house is not ruled by fear. This ground is not abandoned to disorder. This fruit is not left uncovered. The Lord is recognized as owner, source, provider, and protector. And when that recognition is restored, the believer is no longer standing alone against silent erosion. The family is no longer uncovered in the field. The work of the hands is no longer merely exposed to the appetite of the devourer. God Himself speaks. God Himself rebukes. God Himself preserves what belongs to His purpose. Protection follows restored order because covenant order gives heaven legal ground to defend what belongs to God. That is the foundation of Malachi. Not pressure, not manipulation, not fear. Order, honor, lordship, trust. And out of that restored order comes the voice every weary believer needs to hear over the field of their life. I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes. And now we must settle this in the heart. The tithe is not a payment that purchases favor. It is not a religious fee. It is not heaven's tax on the children of God. It is not God standing over His sons and daughters demanding a portion because He lacks supply. No. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. Silver and gold belong to Him. Cattle upon 1,000 hills belong to Him. God is not enriched by man's hand as though He were empty without us. The tithe is recognition. It is the heart taking its rightful posture before the Father and saying, You are the source, not me. You are the owner, not me. You are the provider, not me. That confession is deeper than money. It reaches into identity. It reaches into lordship. It reaches into the secret place where a man decides whether he will live as a covenant son or as a frightened orphan trying to preserve himself. The tithe speaks before fear has time to preach. It says first, God is Lord here. It says before the bills speak, before pressure speaks, before lack speaks, before memory speaks, before the economy speaks. My life begins with God. My supply begins with God. My confidence begins with God. This is why the tithe is rooted in identity before income. An orphan gives with suspicion. A servant gives under compulsion. A religious mind gives to earn. But a covenant son gives in recognition. A covenant daughter honors because she knows the Father is faithful. The tithe is not the desperate act of someone trying to make God kind. It is the settled act of someone who has discovered that God already is Father, already is Source, already is Provider, already is Protector. When the untaught heart looks at provision, it says, I must protect myself. It counts, clutches, fears, calculates, withholds, and calls it wisdom. It says, if I do not keep everything in my own hand, I may not survive. That is the voice of self-reliance. That is the voice of fear dressed in the garments of prudence. But the covenant heart has learned a different language. It says, God is my protector. God is my keeper. God is my source. I honor Him first because He is first. This does not make the believer careless. It makes the believer governed. There is a great difference between responsibility and fear. Responsibility plans under lordship. Fear plans as though God has vanished. Responsibility stewards what belongs to God. Fear hoards what it believes it must save alone. The tithe trains the heart to know the difference. It teaches the soul that first place belongs to God, not to panic. It teaches the hands that honor comes before pressure. It teaches the mind that provision is not merely what I can hold, but what God can govern. That is why the tithe breaks fear slowly and deeply. Every time the believer brings the tithe, the heart is being trained out of self-dependence. It is learning to say, I am not my own source. It is learning to say, my security is not in what remains after I obey. My security is in the one I obey. It is learning to say, I do not honor God after I feel safe. I honor God because He is my safety. This is lordship made practical. Many will say God is Lord, but the tithe asks whether lordship has reached the first place. Not the leftover place, not the convenient place, not the place after fear has finished speaking. The first place. Because whatever receives first place has governing power in the heart. If fear receives first place, fear governs. If pressure receives first place, pressure governs. If self-preservation receives first place, self-preservation governs. But when God receives first place, peace begins to govern. The tithe is the covenant confession that the whole belongs to Him. The 10 does not mean God owns 10 and you own 90. No. The 10 testifies that all is under his lordship. It is the representative portion that sanctifies the order of the whole. It says, everything I am, everything I have, everything I build, everything I steward, stands beneath the government of God. So do not see the tithe as God taxing his children. See it as his children acknowledging their Father. See it as honor restoring order. See it as trust taking the throne before fear can occupy it. See it as the believer's confession in the face of every devouring voice. I belong to God. My house belongs to God. My future belongs to God. My provision belongs to God. He is not an afterthought in my increase. He is Lord over the whole. And this is where we must understand the devourer more clearly. The devourer is not merely a lost dollar. It is not merely a bill you did not expect. It is not merely a season where money seems to move faster than it comes. Those things may be symptoms, but they are not the whole picture. The devourer is anything that consumes what should have been cultivated. It is erosion. It is waste. It is panic. It is confusion. It is breakdown. It is delay. It is the fruit that begins but never matures. It is the harvest that appears and then disappears before it reaches its purpose. Sometimes the devourer does not look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like constant leakage. Strength leaks. Peace leaks. Focus leaks. Time leaks. Relationships leak. Wisdom leaks. Provision leaks through impulses, emergencies, confusion, and decisions made from pressure instead of fellowship. The believer looks at the end of a season and says, "Where did it go? Why did this not last? Why did this not mature? Why do I keep beginning but not finishing? Why does increase come, but peace does not remain?" That is the work of the devourer. And Malachi shows us something very sobering. The devourer is attracted to disorder. He is attracted to the places where honor has been neglected. He is attracted to the places where God is verbally acknowledged but practically displaced. He is attracted to anxious stewardship, impulsive decisions, fear-driven giving, and money managed without worship. He is attracted to the house where first place has become confused, where pressure sits on the throne, where fear makes the first move, and God is consulted only after the soul has already surrendered to panic. The enemy does not need to steal everything if he can keep you scattered. He does not need to empty the whole field if he can keep the fruit from maturing. He does not need to stop every blessing if he can keep you too confused to steward it. He does not need to remove every opportunity if he can keep your heart reactive, uncovered, exhausted, and divided. A scattered believer may still receive provision, but they struggle to preserve it. A reactive believer may still see open doors, but they often walk through them without peace. An uncovered believer may still labor faithfully, but the fruit can be eaten before it reaches its appointed time. This is why order matters. Order is not restrictive, it is protective. The carnal mind hears order and thinks bondage. The fearful heart hears order and thinks loss. The self-reliant soul hears order and thinks control. But in the kingdom, order is the structure that allows life to flourish. Order is the fence around the garden. Order is the alignment that allows blessing to move without being wasted. Order is not God shrinking your life. Order is God protecting your life from the forces that feed on confusion. When God calls His people back to the tithe, He is calling them back to covenant order. He is saying, do not let money become separated from worship. Do not let stewardship become separated from lordship. Do not let increase become separated from honor. Do not let your field stand uncovered while your mouth says, I am Lord. The tithe brings the visible realm into agreement with the invisible truth. God is first. God is owner. God is source. God is protector. Where that recognition is absent, disorder begins to speak. Fear says, hold everything. Pride says, you made this. Anxiety says, God may not come through. Impulse says, spend now because tomorrow is uncertain. Religion says, give so God will not be angry. But covenant says, honor first because the Father is faithful. Covenant says, I do not give from panic. I give from trust. Covenant says, my money will not be managed as though God is absent. My house will not be governed by fear. My field will not be left open to the devourer. This is not about being frightened of the enemy. God is not exposing the devourer to terrify His people. He is exposing him to teach us where protection begins. The Lord names the devourer because He intends to rebuke him. He reveals the erosion because He intends to stop it. He shows the breach because He is calling His people back under covering. There is great peace in this. Once you see that the devourer feeds on disorder, you stop treating every loss as a mystery. You stop calling every leakage normal. You stop spiritualizing confusion. You begin to ask, where has honor been neglected? Where has fear been making the first decision? Where has money been managed without worship? Where have I been trying to preserve in my own strength what God is asking me to bring under His government? And when the believer returns to order, silent erosion begins to lose its access. Peace returns to the center. Wisdom begins to speak again. Decisions become cleaner. Giving is no longer driven by fear. Stewardship is no longer driven by panic. The house begins to breathe under lordship. The field comes under the care of the one who owns it. The devourer feeds on disorder, but covenant order closes the places where erosion has been working silently. That is why the tithe is so fiercely resisted by the enemy. He is not merely afraid of what leaves your hand. He is afraid of what returns to your life when God has first place again. He is afraid of order. He is afraid of peace. He is afraid of a believer who is no longer scattered, no longer reactive, no longer uncovered, but standing under the government of God and saying, "This house belongs to the Lord." And then the Lord says, "I will open you the windows of heaven." Many have heard that only as money. They have pictured heaven opening like a vault, as though the first meaning of the window is cash flow. But windows are not first about money. They are about sight. A window lets light in. A window lets you see what you could not see while the room was closed. A window changes perspective. It does not merely add something to the house. It reveals what is around the house. It shows the field. It shows the road. It shows the season. It shows what is approaching. It shows what has been hidden in darkness. When heaven's windows open, the believer begins to see. This is one of the most powerful protections in Malachi 3. God does not only protect you by stopping the devourer. He protects you by opening your eyes before the devourer can exploit your blindness. He lets you see the wasteful pattern before it becomes a ruin. He lets you see the wrong agreement before it becomes a bondage. He lets you see the impulse before it becomes loss. He lets you see timing, stewardship, strategy, and order. Sight is protection. Many things the devourer consumes are only available to him because the believer cannot see clearly. Confusion is expensive. Pressure is expensive. Fear is expensive. Decisions made in darkness are expensive. A man can lose in one anxious decision what he prayed for during many faithful months. A woman can step into a wrong season because pressure sounded like urgency. A family can waste harvest because they had provision, but not perception. That is why heaven opens windows. God is not merely saying, "I will give you more." He is saying, "I will let light enter the place where confusion has been ruling." He is saying, "I will show you what to keep, what to release, what to build, what to refuse, what to wait for, and what to obey." He is saying, "Your field will not be left to blindness. Your house will not be governed by panic. Your harvest will not be stewarded in the dark." The enemy fights sight because a seeing believer becomes difficult to trap. He can trap the confused. He can manipulate the anxious. He can hurry the fearful. He can deceive the self-reliant. But when heaven gives sight, the soul slows down. Peace rises. Clarity returns. Fear breaks. Wisdom flows. The believer stops making decisions from pressure and starts making decisions from fellowship. This is why the windows of heaven belong inside the promise of protection. Revelation is not separate from preservation. Clarity is not separate from provision. Wisdom is not separate from harvest. Sometimes the blessing is not that God gives you more money first. Sometimes the blessing is that God shows you where the money has been leaking. Sometimes the blessing is that He shows you the habit that has been draining peace. Sometimes the blessing is that He shows you the voice you have been obeying that was never His voice. When heaven opens, you see what disorder had hidden. You see that not every open door is God. You see that not every urgent demand deserves first place. You see that not every fear is wisdom. You see that not every delay is denial. You see that not every opportunity carries kingdom assignment. You see how to steward. You see how to wait. You see how to sow. You see how to refuse the devourer access through confusion. And this sight brings rest, not passivity, rest. The heart no longer lives as though it must answer every pressure immediately. The mind no longer spins in circles trying to manufacture security. The hand no longer clutches because the eye has been opened. The believer begins to say, "I can see now. God is not absent. God is guiding. God is governing. God is showing me the way of peace." Windows are not about money first. They are about heaven's light entering the life of a covenant person. And when light comes, waste is exposed. Wisdom is released. Timing becomes clearer. Stewardship becomes cleaner. And the devourer loses the advantage of darkness. Heaven's windows protect you by giving you sight before the enemy can exploit your blindness. And now the promise becomes very personal. I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes. The Lord does not say, you will rebuke the devourer with better budgeting alone. He does not say, you will overcome the devourer by living in constant suspicion. He does not say, you must stand at every door of your life in fear, trying to catch every invisible thief before he reaches your field. No, he says, I will rebuke. That means the battle is not left to human strength alone. There are losses you can name, and there are losses you cannot name. There are leaks you can see, and there are leaks hidden beneath the surface of your life. There are pressures you understand, and there are patterns you have not yet discerned. There are places where the devourer has been operating quietly, eating strength, eating peace, eating time, eating confidence, eating the tenderness of your heart, eating the fruit before it could come to its appointed maturity. And the Father sees all of it. This is the comfort of covenant protection. God is not blind to the invisible. He does not only see the crisis after it becomes obvious. He sees the root before the branch withers. He sees the opening before the enemy exploits it. He sees the silent erosion before the field looks empty. He knows where the devourer has been feeding. He knows where your strength has been draining. He knows where anxiety has been multiplying. He knows where confusion has been costing you more than money. And he says, I will rebuke. The rebuke of God is not a suggestion. It is not a wish. It is not heaven hoping the devourer will behave differently. It is divine authority confronting illegal consumption. It is the government of God speaking over what has come under His order. It is the Father saying, this seed is mine. This field is mine. This house is mine. This fruit is mine. This future is mine. You may not consume what has been brought under my lordship. Covenant order does not mean life becomes challenge-free. It does not mean there will never be pressure, never be a bill, never be a storm, never be a season where faith must stand. The covenant life is not an exemption from responsibility. It is entrance into a higher government. It means the believer is no longer standing in the field as an uncovered servant, fighting every appetite of darkness with human strength. It means the believer stands under kingdom jurisdiction, where God has the right to enforce His word over what belongs to Him. This is where striving begins to break. Before order is restored, the soul tries to protect itself by tension. It watches everything with fear. It holds everything with anxiety. It plans from panic. It guards from suspicion. It thinks rest is dangerous because rest feels like losing control. But when the heart comes under lordship, protection changes its source. The believer still stewards. The believer still obeys. The believer still watches and walks wisely. But the believer is no longer driven by the terror of being alone. There is a holy difference between vigilance and fear. Vigilance listens to God. Fear listens to danger. Vigilance is peaceful. Fear is frantic. Vigilance is partnership. Fear is isolation. The tithe, as covenant recognition, brings the heart out of isolation and into partnership. It teaches the believer to say, I will obey, but I will not panic. I will steward, but I will not worship control. I will be faithful, but I will not pretend that my strength is the final defense over my life. The Lord says, I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes. That means God Himself steps into the place where your strength ends. God Himself speaks where your eyes cannot see. God Himself confronts what your hands cannot reach. God Himself knows how to stop what you could not even explain. You may have felt the loss, but not known the name of it. You may have watched peace leave and not known where the door opened. You may have seen harvest come and go, opportunity rise and collapse, momentum begin and disappear. And you may have blamed yourself for everything. But the Father is wiser than your self-accusation. He knows the difference between immaturity that must be corrected and devouring that must be rebuked. He knows the difference between a lesson and an attack. He knows the difference between pruning and theft. And when covenant order is restored, God does not merely comfort you while the devourer continues. He confronts the devourer. He rebukes what has been eating the seed. He rebukes what has been draining the harvest. He rebukes what has been touching the fruit. He rebukes what has been troubling the peace. He rebukes what has been threatening the future. This is protection in every direction. Seed is protected because beginnings matter to God. Harvest is protected because increase must not be wasted. Fruit is protected because maturity carries purpose. Peace is protected because the heart must remain governed. Future is protected because God is not merely interested in getting something to you. He is committed to bringing His purpose through you. The devourer wants interruption. God brings preservation. The devourer wants panic. God brings order. The devourer wants premature loss. God brings appointed timing. The devourer wants you exhausted from defending yourself. God brings you into the rest of His government. So the believer can stand differently, not carelessly, not arrogantly, not passively, differently. The believer can stand in trust and say, "My Father sees what I cannot see. My Father knows what I cannot name. My Father rebukes what I could not defeat. My life is under His lordship. My house is under His care. My field is under His word." That confession is not denial. It is covenant faith. It is the heart agreeing with heaven's government. It is the soul refusing to panic as though God has abandoned the field. It is the believer taking their place beneath divine order and letting God be more than a provider, letting Him be protector, letting Him be defender, letting Him be Lord over the unseen places where loss has been operating. Covenant order brings the believer into the place where God Himself confronts the devourer. And when God confronts what has been consuming you, the battle changes. The weight lifts from human striving. The field comes under authority. The house comes under peace. The future is no longer left exposed to silent erosion. God rises over what belongs to Him and says, "For your sake, I will rebuke the devourer." And the promise continues, "Neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field." This is not a small sentence. This is not merely poetic language. This is preservation. This is God speaking not only to the harvest that comes, but to the harvest that must remain until its appointed purpose. There is a kind of loss that does not look like lack at first. It looks like something began but never matured. It looks like a door opened, but panic mishandled it. It looks like an idea came with life on it, but fear strangled it before wisdom could shape it. It looks like a relationship that should have grown strong, but financial anxiety kept bruising it. It looks like provision arriving, but being consumed so quickly by pressure, impulse, confusion, or disorder that it never became useful. That is fruit cast before its time. The vine had fruit. The field had promise. Something was forming, something had begun, but before it could ripen, before it could nourish, before it could serve its purpose, it fell. And many believers know this pain. They have had beginnings, but not completions. They have had increase, but not establishment. They have had opportunities, but not peace to steward them. They have had ideas, but not patience to cultivate them. They have had harvest, but not order strong enough to preserve it. God is not only interested in getting provision to you, He is interested in keeping provision from being devoured before it fulfills its assignment. Heaven is not impressed by quick gain that cannot remain. Heaven is not merely after movement. Heaven is after maturity. Heaven is after fruit that ripens in season, remains under covering, and becomes useful in the purpose of God. This is why covenant order matters to the inner life. Order teaches patience. Order teaches rhythm. Order teaches stewardship. Order teaches the heart not to tear down in fear what God is quietly building in faith. The disorderly heart wants everything now. The fearful heart cannot wait. The anxious mind thinks delay is danger. But the covenant heart learns timing. It learns to say, if God is Lord of the seed, He is Lord of the season. If God is Lord of the harvest, He is Lord of the process. Premature loss often comes through panic. A man receives an opportunity and rushes because he is afraid it will disappear. A woman receives instruction from God and strains because she thinks she must force the outcome. A family receives increase and immediately lets old fear govern new provision. The fruit was there, but it was not protected by peace. It was not guarded by patience. It was not stewarded under lordship. But when God rebukes the devourer, He also preserves the vine. He protects what is forming. He keeps the fruit attached until the time. He guards the unseen process between promise and usefulness. He teaches the believer not only how to receive, but how to remain. Not only how to sow, but how to wait. Not only how to increase, but how to carry increase without being consumed by it. This is a deeper prosperity than quick accumulation. It is preserved fruit. It is maturity under covering. It is the blessing that does not collapse under pressure. It is the harvest that does not fall before wisdom can use it. It is the opportunity that is not lost through haste. It is the peace that keeps the house steady while the fruit is still growing. The devourer wants premature things. Premature decisions. Premature spending. Premature conclusions. Premature quitting. Premature fear. He wants fruit on the ground before it has ripened on the vine. But God says, "It shall not cast before the time." That means your life does not have to be governed by anxious timing. Your harvest does not have to be hurried by fear. Your future does not have to fall because pressure demanded an answer before peace had spoken. Covenant order brings the believer into rhythm with heaven. The heart stops grasping. The hands stop shaking. The mind stops racing ahead of grace. The believer begins to trust the Father not only for provision, but for preservation. And then the confession changes. My fruit will not fall before its time. My harvest will not be wasted before its purpose. My house is under order. My field is under care. My season is in the hand of God. God's protection does not only bring harvest, it preserves fruit until it reaches its appointed purpose. And when fruit remains until its time, it does more than prove that increase came. It proves that God governed the increase. And now we must see the next layer. Protection is not the end of the promise. Preservation is not the final word. God does not merely bring your field under covering so that you can survive with less loss. He brings your life under government so that you can stand in dominion. The tithe is a statement of jurisdiction. It is not merely a private financial habit. It is not merely an old religious custom. It is not merely 10% leaving the hand. It is a covenant confession that says, this life is not governed by fear. This house is not governed by the economy. This future is not governed by pressure. This field belongs under the government of God. Jurisdiction matters because jurisdiction determines enforcement. A promise has authority where the government behind that promise has legal ground to stand. When the believer comes into covenant order, heaven's government stands behind heaven's word. God is not merely speaking comfort from a distance. He is exercising lordship over what has been brought under his rule. This is why the tithe is so much deeper than money. Money is involved, but money is not the center. The heart is the center. Lordship is the center. Government is the center. The tithe takes the visible fruit of labor and places it before God as a confession. You rule here. You govern here. You have first place here. My increase does not belong to fear. My harvest does not belong to pride. My future does not belong to the spirit of this age. I am under another kingdom. There are two systems speaking all the time. The economy says fear. The kingdom says honor. The economy says hoard. The kingdom says trust. The economy says grasp. The kingdom says steward. The economy says survive. The kingdom says rest. The economy trains the soul to live uncovered. It tells the believer to measure security by what can be seen, stored, controlled, predicted, or protected by human strength. It whispers, "You are alone. You must defend yourself. You must hold everything tightly. You must let fear make the first decision." And if the heart listens long enough, it begins to live like an orphan, even while calling God Father. But the kingdom speaks differently. The kingdom says, "Seek first." The kingdom says, "Honor the Lord with your substance." The kingdom says, "Bring the tithe into the storehouse." The kingdom says, "Your Father knows what you have need of." The kingdom says, "You are not alone in the field. You are not abandoned in the pressure. You are not a victim of the economy. You are a covenant child under the care of the Father." That identity must become stronger than the fear around you. You may live in an uncertain economy, but you do not belong to an uncertain kingdom. You may face changing prices, changing markets, changing conditions, changing reports, but your covenant does not change with them. Your Father is not anxious. Heaven is not reacting. The government of God is not shaken by the movements of man. And the tithe becomes one of the practical ways the believer declares, "I will not let fear disciple my stewardship." This is dominion. Dominion is not arrogance. It is not pretending pressure does not exist. It is not speaking loudly while the heart remains afraid. Dominion is the settled authority of a heart that knows where it belongs. It is the confidence of a son or daughter who understands covenant. It is the life that has been brought under lordship until fear no longer has the legal right to govern the first response. When the believer tithes, they are not simply managing personal finance. They are partnering with God's work, God's house, and God's purposes in the earth. The tithe says, "My increase is connected to something bigger than my comfort. My labor is connected to the house of God. My provision is connected to kingdom purpose. My life is not a closed system. I am a steward in the Father's work." This breaks the smallness of fear. Fear turns everything inward. Fear says, "Protect yourself. Think only of yourself. Preserve only yourself." But covenant opens the heart outward. Covenant says, "God is source, so I can honor. God is owner, so I can steward. God is provider, so I can obey. God is protector, so I can rest." The tithe trains the soul to live from source instead of shortage. And once the life comes under kingdom jurisdiction, the believer begins to stand differently in the earth. Not as a beggar trying to escape lack, not as an orphan trying to survive pressure, not as a victim waiting for the next crisis to decide their peace, but as one under government, one under covering, one whose house has been marked by honor, one whose future has been placed beneath the lordship of Christ. The devourer fears this kind of believer because this kind of believer is no longer scattered between two governments. They are not saying God is Lord with their mouth while fear is Lord over their decisions. They are not saying God is source while anxiety governs their firstfruits. They are not saying God is provider while the economy trains their heart. They have come into agreement. Their confession, their stewardship, their giving, their trust, and their house are beginning to speak the same language. This belongs to God. My life belongs to God. My house belongs to God. My future belongs to God. That confession carries authority, not because the believer is strong in themselves, but because heaven stands behind what heaven governs. The tithe is a jurisdictional confession that your life is governed by heaven, not by fear. And when heaven governs, fear loses its throne, pressure loses its voice, and the believer learns to walk in the quiet strength of a kingdom that cannot be shaken. So the response is not panic. The response is not superstition. The response is not a frightened hand throwing money toward heaven as though God must be paid before he will be kind. No, that is not covenant. That is fear wearing religious clothing. Return to order as a son. Return to order as a daughter. Return to order as one who belongs to the Father and has heard his voice saying, "Come back under my government. Come back into my rest. Come back to the place where I am source, owner, provider, and protector." The tithe is not a charm against trouble. It is not a spiritual bargain. It is not an attempt to manipulate God into increase. It is the heart bowing again before lordship. It is the believer saying, "Father, you are my source. You are my owner. You are my provider. I trust your order more than my fear." That is the confession that changes the atmosphere of the house. Not, "I am afraid, so I must give." Not, "I am desperate, so I must try something." Not, "I need God to prove himself, so I will test him with anxiety in my heart." But, "I belong to you. My income belongs under you. My labor belongs under you. My decisions belong under you. My harvest belongs under you. My future belongs under you. This is a peaceful return. It may be serious, but it is not frantic. It may require correction, but it is not condemnation. It may require obedience, but obedience in covenant is not terror. It is trust made visible. Restore first things. Put honor back in its rightful place. Let God be first again, not because the economy is threatening you, but because He is Lord. Bring order to the field. Bring order to the house. Bring order to the heart. Honor God consistently. Steward wisely. Watch the leaks. Refuse impulse. Refuse panic. Refuse to let fear sit at the table as your financial counselor. Fear is a poor counselor. Fear exaggerates danger. Fear forgets covenant. Fear remembers every bill and forgets every promise. Fear makes the hand tremble, the mind race, and the heart accuse God of absence when He has been calling the believer back into order. Do not let fear disciple your stewardship. Let the Word disciple your stewardship. Let honor disciple your stewardship. Let fellowship with the Father disciple your stewardship. And as order returns, something begins to shift inwardly. Anxiety loses its grip. Peace returns to the house. Decisions become clearer. The mind is no longer ruled by shortage. The heart no longer has to clutch everything as though it is alone. There is a quiet strength that rises when the believer knows, I have done the simple thing. I have honored God. I have placed my life under lordship. I am not uncovered in this field. Peace is one of the first signs that order is being restored. Not because every circumstance has changed in a moment, but because the government over the heart has changed. Fear is no longer enthroned. Pressure is no longer Lord. The economy is no longer the voice that decides obedience. The believer stands beneath the Father's care and says, My house will be governed by trust. This is how the devourer loses ground. Not through noise, not through striving, not through religious anxiety, through order, through honor, through a heart that returns to the Father and says, You can govern what I have. You can govern what I need. You can govern what is coming. You can govern what I cannot see. And what God governs, He can protect. What God protects in order, He can multiply in purpose. What He preserves from the devourer, He can use for the kingdom. The fruit that did not fall before its time can become bread for others. The harvest that was not consumed by fear can become seed in the earth. The provision that remained under lordship can become partnership with heaven. So return to order. Let peace govern the house. Let honor have first place again. Let the tithe become the confession of a settled heart. God is source. God is owner. God is provider. God is protector. And the life that rests under His government is no longer driven by fear, but carried by covenant, guarded by promise, and made useful for the purposes of the kingdom.